We need to talk about what's happening in Ukraine, but we need to do it with a larger perspective than what you may be getting from a lot of other sources. Now, to begin, let's be very honest here. The odds of the United States going to war over Ukraine are pretty small. Nobody really wants to go to war over Ukraine. There is a problem, however. It's the same thing with Taiwan. We're not really going to go to war with China if they invade Taiwan, which they probably will do this year. The problem, however, is that if we don't, it will embolden Russia and China more. You only need to look at the situation with the Houthi in Yemen to understand the way this works. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, they're largely taking over Yemen. They were considered a terrorist group by the Trump administration. The Saudis and other Middle Eastern countries were fighting them. The Houthi rebels are funded by Iran. On the first day of the Biden administration, they got rid of the terror designation on the Houthis. The Houthis just launched terror attacks on the United Arab Emirates, causing real destruction in the UAE. Additionally, the UAE said the United States intercepted Houthi missiles targeting the United Arab Emirates. This is from the Associated Press. The United Arab Emirates and the U.S. military intercepted 2 ballistic missiles fired by Yemen's Houthi rebels over the skies of Abu Dhabi early Monday, authorities said. The second attack in a week that targeted the Emirati capital. The missile fire further escalated tensions across the Persian Gulf, which previously had seen a series of assaults near but never indisputably on Emirati soil. It comes during Yemen's year-long war and the collapse of Iran's nuclear deal with world powers. American troops at Al Dhafra Air Base in the capital took shelter in bunkers during the attack and fired back with their own Patriot missiles. The attacks threatened the business-friendly, tourism-focused efforts of the Emirates. The Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saraya claimed the attack in a television statement, saying the rebels targeted several sites in the UAE with both Zulfikar ballistic missiles and drones. He warned the UAE would continue to be a target so long as attacks on the Yemeni people continue. The Biden administration escalated this situation by deterring attacks on the Houthis, trying to show good faith to the Iranians, and it has escalated the situation there. The Houthi and the Iranians sense weakness on the part of the United States and Middle Eastern allies, and they have escalated the situation. Russia, when it invades, not if it invades Ukraine, is going to sense weakness on our part for our failure to re-engage, and it will be expansion on their agenda. Let me explain this to you by talking about NATO. Let me give you the list of members of NATO. Albania, Belgium, Bulgaria, Canada, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Montenegro, Netherlands, North Macedonia, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Now let me break these down further for you, which will open the door into some thinking here. Maybe illuminate the situation for you. Some of these nations used to be members of the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact was the Cold War entity designed to counter NATO. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed after World War II. As the Soviets expanded into Eastern Europe, collapsed Western governments, imposed Soviet regimes. The Western European powers, the United States and Canada, they formed NATO as a military pact using American military muscle in Europe to make it clear to the Soviets if they tried to expand further west, if they attacked any of those members, there would be global war. There is an effort now by some to say we don't need NATO anymore because the Soviet Union is gone. They misunderstand history. And we'll get to that. But herein lies the problem. Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia. All of them were part of the Warsaw Pact. They were all controlled by the Soviet Union. Some of them were part of the Soviet Union. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they were the Baltic republics, we call them now. They were taken over first by the Soviets. They got freedom and immediately sought out the West. Slovenia, Slovakia, we used to have a country on the map called Czechoslovakia. We now have two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. They were forcibly united by the Soviets, and after the Soviet Union fell apart, they broke up, went their separate ways. Montenegro, North Macedonia, Slovenia, Croatia, they all were connected to Yugoslavia and the sphere of influence of Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, Poland, all of them within the Soviet sphere of influence. And therein lies the problem for those who think NATO is a relic of the Cold War for which we no longer need. The Soviet Union, at its heart, were a bunch of Russians who still maintained, despite throwing off and killing the Russian Empire and czars, the belief of a Russian sphere of influence, a natural sphere of influence. Since Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, the Russian czars and then the Soviet Union, and now Vladimir Putin and the Russian Republic, have viewed themselves as possessing a sphere of influence that extends into the eastern portions of Europe and the northern portions of Asia, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. They even view it as in Turkey, and Vladimir Putin has slowly been turning the Turks against us. The Turks were one of the original NATO allies. They're turning against us, and Vladimir Putin is doing his best to turn them towards Russia. Now, there are problems there because historically, the Ottomans and the Russian Empire were at war over the Crimea, Georgia, and other areas there. And so there's a lot of deep historic distrust there, but we are dealing not with short-term thinking here. We're dealing with long-term thinking that American impatience has a problem processing because so many Americans deal with short-term thinking. We think in terms of midterms and presidential election cycles. The Russians think in terms of history, in terms of 50 years, in terms of 100 years. We may not be dealing with the Soviet Union, but we're dealing with a KGB czar who is now the president of Russia. In Vladimir Putin, he has the Soviet thinking, and the Soviet thinking of their sphere of influence is premised on the Russian czars' ideas of their sphere of influence. So the Russians want Ukraine. Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. There was a terrible famine there as well. Stalin killed millions of Ukrainians. When the Soviet Union fell and we had Russia and Ukraine separated, it used to be the Ukraine, now Ukraine, Crimea had historically been the realm of the Russian czars, but it was in Ukraine, and they allowed Russia to keep a navy base there. Russia organized essentially a rebellion there and took over the Crimea for themselves. There was nothing any of the Western powers could do about it. The Russians have always wanted a fleet on the Black Sea to be able to get out into the Mediterranean. They needed Crimea to do it. It was of strategic importance, and so they grabbed it, and they've kept it. They have incurred into Georgia, a province there where Edward Shevardnadze was for years the president of Georgia. He had been the last foreign minister of the Soviet Union, became the president of Georgia, maintained a lot of Western ties there, was very corrupt. Ultimately, I think he passed away a few years ago, but there had been a revolt, new leadership, and then the Russians came in and took over and installed their people. The Russians believe in a sphere of influence, and now herein lies the greater problem. Albania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Poland, Montenegro, North Macedonia. All of these countries, the Russians view them as being in their sphere of influence. Now, none of these countries liked the Soviets. They don't like the Russians. They didn't want any part of those. Some of those countries have moved back into heavy-handed authoritarian types. But overwhelmingly, they haven't liked the Russians. They have liked Western Europe. They have wanted to lean to the West. The Baltics in particular, even though closer to the Soviet Union than, for example, Poland, have been very pro-Western, and yet the Russians believe they should be in their sphere of influence. Now, these are NATO allies. If the Russians take over Ukraine and we do nothing, they're not going to stop at Ukraine, and they're not going to stop at Ukraine because the Russians believe they have a natural sphere of influence. So already they're making rumblings. Vladimir Putin has openly said, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they need to come home. Even the Finnish are bolstering their military resources on their border because the Russians have been making claims on Finnish territory, which they believe is in their natural sphere of influence. But do any of you want your kids to die for Montenegro or Albania? Do any of you want your kids to die for North Macedonia or Latvia or Lithuania or Estonia? Anybody? Putin knows this. Small surrenders get you very big wars. And Putin understands this. And we have a geriatric president right now who may not comprehend that. No one wants war in Ukraine. There are a lot of people, I have friends of mine who say, Europe, screw them. The problem here is that Vladimir Putin is also working with Chinese President Xi, who wants to do the same thing with Taiwan, and we're not going to fight over Taiwan. But Xi has said that his natural sphere of influence, when you show maps from China that originate in China, and they show China, you know, China includes Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, lots of the South China Sea. They have expansionist territory there. We don't defend Taiwan. Suddenly they start looking at North Vietnam. Suddenly they start looking at the Philippines, which, by the way, used to be American territory. Small surrenders lead to big wars. No one wants to die for Albania. Let the Russians have it. But the Russians, if they get taste of it, they're going to want to keep expanding. And at some point, NATO either means something or it doesn't. Now, there are those, Tucker Carlson is why do we have NATO? We have NATO still because the Soviet Union may be dead, but the Soviet Union's thinking, a lot of it was premised on the thinking of the Russian czars and their expansionist taste. And we have a lot of allies who have accepted our word. And if our word is not good to them and we let them fall to the Russians, then a lot of other countries around the world are going to start falling to the Russians and the Chinese, and the Western order collapses. And you would think that a lot of people who are bellyaching about this and or let the Russians have it are some of the people who lament the war on Western civilization and how the left has waged a war on Western civilization. And that war on Western civilization in the academy, in business, in entertainment has ultimately led to a lot of people with a lot of self-loathing in the West who don't realize that we are the world order that maintains peace and democracy. If you fall and these nations come under the sphere of the Russians, other nations will fold up shop and move into the Russian and Chinese sphere of influence, and suddenly the dominant world order will be the illiberal world order, where you will not have your freedom of speech and your freedom to travel the world be protected like it is right now. It will destabilize the world and put all of us at a disadvantage economically, militarily, national security-wise. We will be at a massive disadvantage. The United States seems to be going back to sleep in the world, and these other powers are realizing we're going back to sleep. And across the left and the right, people are like, well, I'm not going to go die for Montenegro. No, you're not. And that's the problem. We as a nation have given up on trying to defend the Western order. Vladimir Putin knows it. And pretty soon there will be no Western order to defend when the Russians start getting hungry to expand their tendencies back into Eastern Europe and spread their tentacles abroad, because these small surrenders will ultimately get us to a very destabilized world. That's why Ukraine matters. It's not that any of us want to go to war to defend Ukraine. It's that history itself shows us if we allow the Russians to start expanding, they're going to start expanding directly against us. Oh, hey, there's this old Russian province you might have heard of that they've eyed repeatedly in the past. It's called Alaska.